What would you do if you heard someone whisper your name in your exact voice? What if the trees suddenly went silent, completely silent? Could you stay calm if the voice followed you wherever you ran? Would you take a photo into the dark just to prove something was really out there? What would you do if the photo showed something taller than a man, but missing a face? It's a strange thing. Memory. We think we own our past, that it's a neatly filed collection of moments we can pull out and examine at will. But some memories aren't yours to keep. They belong to the places where they were born, and if you're not careful, they'll follow you home. Just to remind you, I know this because one of them followed me, and now it lives in the silence of my apartment. 2 years ago, photography was my everything. Not the clean, sterile shots you see in magazines, but the raw, untamed soul of the wild. I wanted to capture a world without people, a world that had forgotten we even existed. My obsession led me deep into the Appalachian range, chasing a phantom on a map, a mist-filled valley in western North Carolina that didn't have a name. It was the perfect subject, a place that was, for all intents and purposes, a secret. The drive itself was a descent into isolation. Paved roads surrendered to gravel, and gravel bled into a muddy, 2-track scar winding into the mountains. The last outpost of humanity was a gas station that looked like it was being slowly reclaimed by the forest it stood against. The paint was peeling, the pumps were rusted, and the man behind the counter looked as ancient as the hills themselves. His skin was a roadmap of wrinkles, and his eyes held a deep, weary stillness. I spread my map on the counter, the paper crinkling with age. "I'm looking for a way into this valley," I said, pointing to a blank space between 2 jagged peaks. He squinted, not at the map, but at me. His gaze drifted to the expensive camera gear piled in my passenger seat, then out the grimy window towards the mountains. "There's the Whisperin Gap," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Won't find it on any new map. There's an old hunter's trail off Route 181. It ain't marked, but it'll get you there. Prettiest sunrise you'll ever see." He leaned forward, the smell of stale coffee and menthol hanging in the air. His friendly demeanor evaporated, replaced by a gravity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "But you hear me now. You be off that ridge before the sun bleeds out. After dark, them woods, they start talking. And you don't want to hear what they got to say." What could the woods possibly say? And why did the timeline matter so much? I chalked it up to local folklore, the kind of ghost story you tell tourists to give them a little thrill. I thanked him, bought a bottle of water I didn't need, and left, feeling his eyes on my back until I rounded the first bend. The trail was exactly where he said it would be, a faint suggestion of a path that seemed to be swallowed by a wall of gnarled oaks and rhododendrons. The moment I stepped under the canopy, the temperature dropped. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The distant hum of my SUV's engine faded, and for a while, I was serenaded by the typical forest symphony. The chatter of a squirrel, the distant caw of a crow, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But as I climbed higher, the sounds began to peel away, layer by layer, until there was nothing left. Have you ever stood in a silence that feels loud? Not just quiet, but a profound, unnatural void. The birds were gone. The insects had ceased their chirping. Even the wind seemed to die in the branches above me, too afraid to move. It was like the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for a terrible cue. The silence was a presence in itself, a weight pressing in on my eardrums. It felt fundamentally, primally wrong. What could make an entire ecosystem fall silent all at once? Unease coiled in my stomach, a cold snake of dread. but my ambition was stronger. I pushed through the oppressive quiet and finally reached a rocky promontory. The view was, as the old man promised, divine. The valley below was a sea of rolling mist, pierced by the dark green tips of ancient pines. It was everything I had hoped for. I set up my tripod, my hands feeling clumsy and slow, my senses on high alert. Hours passed. The sun began its slow descent, painting the clouds in hues of orange and violent purple. And that's when I heard it. It was faint at first, a thin thread of sound carried on a ghost of a breeze. A woman, weeping. It wasn't a theatrical sob. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief that cut right through me. My first instinct, the human one, was to help, to call out, to follow the sound. But my body refused. My feet felt like they'd been nailed to the rock. I was miles from any road, deep in a forest that felt dead to the world. Who could possibly be out here? A more primal, terrified part of my brain was screaming at me. A silent, frantic warning that to walk towards that sound was to walk towards my own end. The sun touched the horizon, and the shadows in the valley began to stretch and writhe like living things. The old man's warning echoed in my head. Be off that ridge before the sun bleeds out. Panic, cold and sharp, finally spurred me into action. I fumbled with my gear, my fingers numb, and scrambled back towards the trail. But the forest was no longer the one I had walked through. In the deep twilight, every tree was a twisted silhouette, every path a dark mirage. I was turned around in minutes. Panic gave way to terror. I yanked out my phone. No signal. Of course. My handheld GPS was even worse. The screen was frozen on a jumble of pixels, a useless brick in my hand. I was well and truly lost, and the forest began to talk. It wasn't the crying woman this time. It was a whisper. So close it felt like it was breathed directly into my ear. Jake. It was my own voice. Not a recording, not an echo. It was my voice, with my exact inflection, my cadence. It was as if I had spoken the word myself, but my lips hadn't moved. Ice flooded my veins. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice cracking. From the trees on my left, the perfect mimicry came back, a mocking, empty replication. "Who's there?" What was this thing? A parrot? A lyrebird? No animal could do that. How did it know my name? How did it know my voice? I didn't wait for another answer. I ran. I abandoned the trail, the tripod, everything. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, my lungs burning. I just had to get down. In a small, moonlit clearing, my foot caught on something, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. My flashlight, which I'd been gripping in a white-knuckled fist, skittered across the forest floor. Its beam sliced through the darkness and landed on a small, muddy child's sneaker, its laces untied. A few feet from it lay a single modern-looking hiking pole, and beyond that, a pair of glasses, one lens cracked, glinting in the pale light. They weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged, almost presented. Little memorials, tiny shrines for the lost. My blood ran cold with a horrifying thought. How many others had heard a sound they couldn't ignore? A lost child, a loved one's call. How many people had stood exactly where I was now, drawn in by a phantom voice, and never left? Then, the performance began. A symphony of horrors erupted from the darkness all around me. The heartbroken sobs of the woman, the innocent, chilling laughter of a small child, and woven through it all, a chorus of my own voice, calling my name from every direction at once. It was a cacophony of bait. Jake. 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 I was in the center of a closing trap. I scrambled up, every instinct screaming. My camera, forgotten, was still slung around my neck. On some primal, desperate impulse, I spun around, raised it towards the loudest of the voices, and fired the flash. The world bleached white for a split second. I didn't wait to see. I just ran, fueled by a terror so profound, it felt like my soul was trying to claw its way out of my body. I don't know how long I ran. Time ceased to exist. There was only the burn in my legs, the terror in my heart, and the sound of my own name chasing me through the dark. Then, I saw it. The dirt road. My SUV, a beautiful, beautiful metal box of safety. I threw myself inside, fumbling with the keys, locking the doors with a trembling hand. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, tires spinning in the dirt before finding purchase. As I careened past the old gas station, its windows dark and empty, I saw a lone figure on the porch, illuminated by the tiny orange ember of a cigarette. It was the old man. He watched my truck approach, his expression unreadable in the dark. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't shocked. He just watched. As I passed, he gave me a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture not of greeting, but of grim acknowledgement. A look of profound pity crossed his face. Then he touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat and disappeared back inside. Was his warning an act of mercy? Or had he sent me there knowing full well what I would find? A test I had, somehow, impossibly, passed. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. Back in the safety of my apartment, 1,000 miles away from those mountains, I finally dared to look at the photo. My hands shook as I uploaded it to my computer. It was mostly a blur of motion, streaked with the light of the flash. But in the center of the frame, caught for 1/700th of a second, was a shape. It stood against the blackness, pale and impossibly tall. Its limbs were long and thin, like stretched bone, and they bent at angles that anatomy should not allow. It was featureless, faceless. Where a head should have been, there was only a dark, smooth, hollow space, an indentation that seemed to drink the light around it. What in God's name was that thing? I sold my camera gear. I moved to a flat, boring city in the middle of the country, a place where the highest point for miles is an overpass. I told myself it was a stress-induced hallucination, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. I almost believed it, until last night. In the dead quiet of my 3rd-floor apartment, a sound from the living room pulled me from my sleep. It was a single, whispered word, cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. It was my own voice, unmistakable and clear, and it was asking a question that I know will never be answered, because it's a question I'll be too afraid to answer for the rest of my life. Jake, are you there? And that's where the story ends. Or perhaps, for Jake, where it begins again. What do you believe happened? Is the creature real and now haunting his apartment? Or is it a chilling manifestation of his own paranoia? Share your theories in the comments section below. If this story is going to stick with you tonight, let me know by leaving a like. And to make sure you don't miss the next tale I've pulled from the shadows, take a moment to subscribe and turn on all notifications. Until next time, be careful what you listen for in the quiet of your own home.